Scotland depth chart for the 2023 Rugby World Cup, folks. Scotland have kept things consistent in terms of their coach, which is more than we can say for the likes of England, Australia, Fiji, Wales, etc. So how's this going to reflect in their depth? Are things relatively stable, or has there been a lot of chopping and changing across this Rugby World Cup cycle? We have already looked at a few teams. South Africa, New Zealand, relatively peaceful, stable, seemingly got a bit of a plan. You can check those videos up there. England, Australia, pretty messy. Let's have a look at Scotland and see how they compare. We're going to go through the depth by position. Who are the kind of biggest omissions and what's been the most picked 15 of the 33 guys available at the Rugby World Cup, and how does that look for the kind of current form? If we just chuck the squad up there as a whole across the entire Rugby World Cup cycle, there are certainly some positions which are dominated by individuals. I'm looking at you, Stuart Hogg, at 15. I'm looking at Duhan van der Merwe, number 11. Hogg in the minutes. I didn't mean to make a pun there with Hogg. Ali Price at 9. Matt Fagerson, less so at 8. But, certainly Hamish Watson at 7. Xander Fagerson at 3. There's a bunch of these guys who kind of get 60-odd% of the minutes. Yeah, really kind of consistent picks in their position. And then there are some positions, like they've tried a lot of guys at number 6. That's a lot of different colours. The back row generally, they've had a lot of guys kind of come in for the odd cameo appearance and then bugger off, basically. So the Scottish one, some of them look pretty healthy. Like if you're thinking about healthy depth being like a solid chunk for your starter, a slightly smaller chunk for your backup, and then still enough of a chunk for your third guy that if they were to be chucked into a World Cup knockout match, they would still have enough experience under their belt to be pretty comfortable. Hooker doesn't look too bad. Green, blue, yellow, they're all pretty decent chunks. Some of the locks, like number 4, boom, 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 nice 3 big chunks. Even, 10 looks pretty decent, looks pretty healthy. But the main thing we're looking at is what happens when you take out all the minutes of the guys who haven't made the Rugby World Cup squad, because that's kind of more what we're interested in. So let's have a look at the Scottish front row once we take out all the guys who didn't make the Rugby World Cup. And honestly, it looks pretty okay, I think. Loose head, number 1. Schoeman is there with just under half of the game time. He is pretty much a locked-in starter. Rory Sutherland is there as the kind of backup guy. Their roles have kind of switched since Schoeman's become Scotland eligible, right? Sutherland was on the Lions tour not that long ago, but he's certainly fallen behind Schoeman in the pecking order, and then Jamie Batty there in yellow. Tight head prop number 3 is much more reliant on Xander Fagerson. He's kind of nigh on 70% of the game time, with Nell there in blue and Javan Sebastian there in yellow. Sebastian, yeah, he's not had a heck of a lot of game time at test level, and there might be a reason for that. But, that just kind of is what it is. If Xander is fit and not suspended, I think he's going to be a key man to the Scottish efforts. Hooker is one where you see a lot more minutes kind of not make their way through to the World Cup, because the guys you've got going is George Turner in green, Ashman in blue, and then Dave Cherry there in yellow, with McAnally and Brown a pretty sizable chunk of the minutes that are not going. So it was like back in 2020, it was McAnally and Brown. Those were the guys, starting and backup guy. It was one or the other. The other guys weren't really so much in the picture, but over the course of this Rugby World Cup cycle, that has certainly shifted. But overall, there's not like any kind of one huge omission. Like the guys you're missing, apart from McAnally and Brown, you got the likes of Alan Dell, Ollie Kebble, Simon Bergen, Murphy Walker. Like there's a few guys, but none of them that you've been like absolutely reliant on in this Rugby World Cup cycle who's not made the plane to France. Locks, though, is a little bit of a different one. If you're looking at your loose head lock, that's the one with like only a little bit of grey at the top. Most of these guys are still going. Scott Cummings, there in green. Grant Gilchrist there in blue. And Sam Skinner there in yellow. All those guys are going. They've all had relatively solid chunks of time across this World Cup cycle. Cummings is the most, but he's not a heck of a lot more than the other guys. So that's actually kind of a relatively even distribution. And then Richie Gray's there in purple. Whereas then when we switch to tight head lock, there's a massive chunk of Gray because you're missing Johnny Gray. He had just under half of the game time across this World Cup cycle. The fact that he is injured and not available for this World Cup is absolutely brutal. I wish he was there. I mean, you guys know he's one of my favourite players. So, yeah, I mean, there is a grey there. I mean, Gilchrist is there in green, so he appears on both sides. He's there in blue on loose headlock, and then green on tight headlock. Richie Gray is there, and he seems to be maybe the kind of premier guy to fill his brother's shoes at the moment in blue, and then Skinner and Cummings. So both those guys kind of swap roles. There seems to be less, I mean, apart from I think Johnny Gray pretty much always plays behind the tight head, there seems to be less kind of defined roles as to who goes on which side. With the Scottish locks, like some of the sides, like Eben Etzebeth's pretty much exclusively a tight head lock for South Africa. Brodie Retallick's pretty much exclusively for New Zealand. I guess that's Johnny Gray's role. With Scotland to be that kind of big powerhouse unit. But yeah, with Richie Gray there, I think you've got a big bit of Scottish beef to help out. But I just wish Johnny Gray was there. I mean, Ben Toulis, also Cameron Henderson, some other guys who've got some game time. But the majority of the Scottish locks, barring Johnny Gray, who've had any kind of sizable chunk of game time this Rugby World Cup cycle, are going to the World Cup. Back row, like I mentioned, there's a lot of guys they have tried. And there's also a few guys who swap between positions, like Jamie Ritchie. He's had a lot of game time at 6. He is there with about half of the game time. But he is also featuring there as the second most minutes at number 7 behind Hamish Watson. So that's green 6 is Jamie Ritchie, and then blue 7 is Jamie Ritchie. So that shows you, I mean, if he's not injured, he's pretty much playing, and he's playing 80 minutes for Scotland, which is the captain. That makes a lot of sense. So Jamie Ritchie 6, huge chunk. Matt Fagerson's also done some 6. Rory Darge, and then some of the other guys have kind of filled in Crosby and Skinner and whatnot when needs be. But for the most part, if Jamie Ritchie's available, he's playing 6 if he's not playing 7. 7 is Hamish Watson, followed by Ritchie and Darge. Those are your top 3 guys, with Crosby there as well. But interestingly, like Watson there with like 65% of the game time has been dominant for the majority of the cycle, but you feel like maybe he's plateaued or he's hit his peak and is maybe at 31, I think he is. Maybe he's under threat because, I mean, Darge is there in yellow at number 7. Has not had that much game time, but he's looking the business. So that's going to be an interesting call for the coach. There's a few positions like that with the Scottish squad where the mainstay guy across the cycle in the last kind of 12 months has maybe come under a bit of threat. And then number 8, Matt Fagerson there in green, and then Jack Dempsey there in blue. Those are your main 2 guys. Everyone else who's played there is basically a fill-in. All the other kind of regular 8s, like Bradbury, like Hanning, like Bayliss, like Gary Graham, Corno de Brea, none of these guys have made the World Cup squad. I mean, Blade Thompson also didn't make it, Blair Cowan, Dylan Richardson. You guys have used a lot of loosies with the Scotland squad, but a lot of them only kind of token minutes. The mainstay guys, Ritchie, Watson, Fagerson, and then more recently Dempsey, Darge, Crosby, all these guys are going to the World Cup. So, yeah, there's no real position that looks hopelessly excluded or some big omission. Johnny Gray and McAnally and Brown, I guess, are the kind of main guys across this World Cup cycle. Heading into the backs, Ali Price at number 9. Hugely important, but kind of like Hamish Watson, as I mentioned, maybe just kind of turning that corner a little bit, that he's kind of lost that starting position, because then Ben White is there in blue. Ben White does seem to be the favoured guy in more recent times, and then George Horn's there in yellow. So there's been a heap of game time among these 3 guys. Obviously, Ali Price has been hogging the majority of it. You might like a little bit more time for the other 2 guys. And then there's been like a constant stream of backups who've never really stuck, like Hidalgo Klein in 2020, Scott Steele in 2021, Ben Vallicott in 2022, and then Dobby in 2023 has not made it. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Hopefully Ben White is fit, remembering he picked up a bit of a knock just before the World Cup squads were named. And then number 10, Finn Russell's there with about half of the game time. Kinghorn has also had a decent chunk of game time there in blue. And then more recently, Ben Healy in yellow. Would have been nice to get Ben Healy a bit more game time going into World Cup. But honestly, if Finn Russell's fit, Finn Russell's playing. And then Adam Hastings is the main guy who's had game time, who's not made the squad at 10. But you've also had Duncan Weir. You've had Van der Vault. You've had Rory Thompson. Was it Rory Thompson? Ross Thompson. Yeah. So you've had a few guys have some game time, but it's largely Hastings that is kind of the biggest omission in terms of game time. But Finn Russell is your mainstay, so I wouldn't be thinking too kind of dramatically about that. I would be interested to see if Finn Russell were to go down today, do they trust Ben Healy with that really limited experience, but who's kind of more of a specialist 10, or would they chuck in Kinghorn, who for mine still feels like an outside back who can jump into 10 when needs be. For mine, I would like Kinghorn as your third choice guy, despite the fact that he is there with the second most amount of game time at 10. Midfield is a really interesting one because you have chucked away a lot of game time in Sam Johnson. Whatever happened to Sam Johnson? Why did he kind of fall off the radar? Was he just supplanted by Tuipulotu? So 12. Tuipulotu's there with around about a third of the game time. And he's kind of formed a really great relationship with Hugh Jones. They're a cracking midfield. And the midfield is another one of these ones where it used to be Sam Johnson and Chris Harris. And now in this kind of last 12, 18 months seems to have been supplanted by two of the newer guys. So when I say newer, Hugh Jones isn't new, but you know what I mean. So Tuipulotu's there at 12 as the main guy in green, and Cameron Redpath, when he's fit, he's obviously a good option there in blue. And then the other guys are all kind of token minutes, like filling in. Like Finn Russell's filled in mid-game when needs to be. Hugh Jones is filled in. But Sam Johnson is the major chunk. You've also had Lang and Duncan Taylor and Hutchinson and Matt Scott, who've also had a wee bit of game time. But yeah, Sam Johnson is the kind of biggest guy, him and Johnny Gray, I think, and Stuart Hogg, to not make the squad who were kind of mainstays across the cycle. And then 13, a lot more stable. Chris Harris there with over half the game time. But as I said, in more recent times, he has been supplanted by Hugh Jones, who's there in blue. And then the other guys who've filled in have only been kind of getting token game time. Bennett and Stafford McDowell and whatnot. But yeah, midfield is going to be an interesting one. I think it's Tuipulotu and Jones, barring some kind of injury. Wings and fullback. Fullback, geez, look at Stuart Hogg. I've seen the interviews with him. He seems gutted, but he's just like, my body wasn't up to it. I was the slowest back in all the training and testing they were doing. Body just wasn't keeping up. So he made the call. That's just unfortunate timing, isn't it? You would have loved to see him go out one last hurrah, but yeah, man, he had an absolute lock on that fullback position. So yeah, his omission changes things. Ollie Smith is there in green at 15 alongside Blair Kinghorn. They've had a very similar amount of game time. And then the other guys who have been filling in yellow are just kind of, token minutes filling in when needs be. But I do like Kinghorn at fullback. So that's kind of one of the bright side of Stuart Hogg being retired, as they're starting to see Kinghorn maybe back as an outside back instead of a 10, which I'm kind of in favour of. So yeah, Hogg missing leaves a massive hole, but as I said, maybe there is a bright side to it. Left wing is absolutely Duhan van der Merwe. There's been no player since Hogg's retired in the Scotland squad who's played more game time in any one position than Duhan van der Merwe on that left wing. Like in 2020, I think he just comes along right at the end of the season when he gets eligible. Prior to that, it was like the likes of Kinghorn and Steyn who've had a bit of game time. But yeah, Duhan has just been ever present on that left wing, and rightly so. And the right wing, less so with Darcy Graham, but he's still got more than half the game time. Kyle Steyn there as well. Blair Kinghorn a bit of game time. The main guys you're missing out on is Shaw Maitland, who hasn't played for Scotland since 2020, and then Rufus McLean, who's never going to play for Scotland again. So yeah, that's the main look at the Scotland squad. 78 players by my count, I think, including at least one player who got selected for a game but didn't get off the bench. From memory, it was a halfback. But the main omissions when you look at the Scotland squad, it's Stuart Hogg. He retired. Nothing the coach can do about that. Johnny Gray, he's injured. Nothing the coach can do about that. And then Sam Johnson has kind of fallen off the pace. And then the two hookers, McAnally and Brown. Everywhere else, the majority of the experienced guys who've been trusted across this World Cup cycle are still heading to the World Cup. So that's pretty encouraging and maybe speaks to the stability with the coaching setup in Scotland. The ones where they've changed the coaches look a lot more helter-skelter. So that's maybe kind of pleasing from a Scottish point of view. Your starting 15, based on the World Cup cycle, would be Schoeman, Turner and Fagerson. And I think those are the three guys who got the most game time in their positions, which is stable. Cummings and Gilchrist in the second row, it would have been Johnny Gray. And it may be going to be Richie Gray. But based on game time, it's Cummings and Gilchrist. And in the back row of Richie, Watson and Fagerson. Like I mentioned, it may be Richie, Darge and Fagerson, but we'll have to see how much of a run Darge can have at that number 7 position. 9 and 10, Price and Russell. But as I said, realistically, at the moment, it's probably White and Russell. And then midfield, Tuipulotu and Harris. Probably going to be Tuipulotu and Jones, but just based on game time. It would have been Sam Johnson based on game time, but he's not made the squad. And then Van der Merwe, Graham and Ollie Smith. I think Van der Merwe and Graham are probably locks in, and then maybe Kinghorn at fullback. But yeah, it has been an interesting look at the Scottish squad. Like I said, pretty stable. I don't think you'd have too many complaints with that if you're a Scotland fan. There weren't kind of any massive exclusions, and as I said, barring the likes of Hogg and Gray, I think the coach has pretty much got all the best players available that he wants to take to the tournament. I wish you guys were in a different pool. How would I love to see you guys on the other side of the draw? But not to be. But anyway, you guys let us know your thoughts on the Scotland depth chart. Feel free to check out the other depth charts like I mentioned, just to compare. It might give you a bit of different look on how some of the coaches have gone about things across this World Cup cycle. But yeah, you guys take care, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.